As we navigate these transitional times, there's not always an obvious path to follow. With many questions to navigate, but no simple answers to guide us, we look for the footprints of others to consider where we might place our own. Even the most experienced travelers recognize they are continually finding their way, unsure of what's around the next bend or over the next peak. An ongoing dance with uncertainty, switching between action and inspiration, acting before we think too much, and thinking before we go too far. So although taking the first or next step can often feel like the hardest, knowing you are not walking alone is a vital part of the journey. Whether or not the route you take becomes a path for others to follow doesn't matter. We help each other not as experts, but as parents, neighbours, colleagues, and citizens, and all our stories are unique and all our voices are welcome. So we like to do the words just to sort of give a sense of, what the next hour is going to be about. And yeah, today, really happy to have Tony and Hubert joining us, who I'm not quite sure how long you guys have been joining the sessions, but it feels like I've seen you around for a while, maybe 12 months, a little bit more. So sort of familiar part of the sort of collective, like a few of you are as well. I know a few of you have attended a couple of sessions. And I suppose a couple of years ago when we started doing these things, we often invited sort of external guests who, we thought were quite inspirational to do little talks, little 15-minute talks to introduce, like, who they are, where they've come from, what's kind of alive for them, where they're heading, what interests them about regeneration. But we don't always do too much of that stuff with like people within the group that we know. And obviously the group generally is all like, you're all a humble bunch who probably don't think you're experts in anything, but we just like to encourage the fact that that shouldn't be a barrier to entry here. We're all kind of peer learning, right? So beginner's mind's a really important part of the collective. So really happy to say that like Tony and Hubert, when I chatted to them earlier in the year. I think we might have chatted to John as well, and probably, I think, Lizzie, Hubert, don't you? So, but it sounds like there's a few interesting things happening in their worlds. And I thought actually it'd be really nice to share that with the rest of us here and, to see what threads we can kind of riff on and what things we've got in common. But like I say, take it with a pinch of salt that the theme is bioregionalism, but there might be a bit of a tenuous link there because we were talking about that topic before we got started, and maybe we'll find that there's some pros and cons to the language of bioregionalism. And again, all that's kind of welcome. There's just a few different perspectives that we can talk through. So I thought, and obviously, if any of you ever feel like you want to chat about a topic, feel free. We try to keep these sessions as informal and as open as possible. So if there's something that you've got a burning wish to introduce people to, or just to sort of even get some thoughts and input and feedback from the community on, then you're more than welcome. I know John was just saying at the start of this session, we've got a few maybe coming up in the next, we don't know whether it'll be at the end of this year or early next year, but there's a few people that have already sort of very keen to have some topics to discuss that they want to raise. So if you've got anything, do get in touch with us. But otherwise, yeah, thanks for joining us. I guess we're here for like, whatever, 50 or so minutes. And then so we're going to just start with, like, I think we'll go through and like let Hubert lead us off, and then we'll move into Tony stuff. And then if you've got any sort of questions or anything like that, feel free to either keep them in your head, or you can add them into the chat somewhere if you want us to ask those. But we'll probably try and do the intros from the guys first, and then move into like a sort of open session if that works. So if that all sounds good, Hubert, are you good to sort of give us a little introduction and talk? Yeah, well, your thoughts would be great.
So introduction about myself, I suppose, or where I am at right now.
Yeah, I think a little bit of, introduce yourself, what's kind of, where you've come from, where you're thinking of heading off to, any of your thoughts that you've got
Yep.
around the sort of things we talked about.
Yeah. So, hello, I'm Hubert Fonteijn. As you can hear, I'm not English or British. I'm Dutch. I've come to the UK for the second time as a student of Schumacher College, where I got to know Lizzie. She was a year. We were in the same year at Regenerative Economics. And I have a background which I guess I can summarize with 3 points. I grew up on a farm, then ran away of it, not literally, but, pretty figuratively speaking, by studying physics and then going into a PhD about statistical methods in neuroscience. And that set me off on a path of being what we would nowadays call a data scientist. So someone who's a skill set has working with data, working with quantitative models. And I've applied these skills in a couple of different settings, academic, non-academic, worked in finance for a bit. And that was kind of the second twist, because I found finance really interesting. And at the time, I was mostly concerned with financial stability. It's just after the financial crisis of 2008. And I made a career change from academic data science stuff into risk management. And then I found out over the next 3 years that risk management in and of itself doesn't have too much to contribute to financial stability, and is mainly an exercise of regulatory compliance. And although I liked what I did at the time, I had this kind of image that I thought, oh, in 20 years' time, I'm sitting here, maybe having risen 1 or 2 rungs on the ladder, and my biggest success in life is having won another battle with the regulator. And I didn't really like that. So I went back into academia, moving back actually towards my agricultural roots that I had to run so hard away from. And did that for a while, started thinking about how can financial instruments help in the transition to regenerative agriculture. So, because what I noticed, and actually this started a little bit before I started working in the university again, I was doing kind of a private exploration, talking to quite a few players in the Dutch agricultural fields, including the financial the institutions that support Dutch farmers. I found there's a lot of interest in this transition, more than you would expect. And this is 7 or 8 years ago, way before regenerative agriculture became a thing, or a concept that was hip and happening. But there's kind of it seems to be a missing piece of the puzzle to get things into action. And I was interested in the question whether that missing piece might be a missing piece of financial instrumentarium. How can you distribute the risk that a farmer individually is taking when making transition from traditional agriculture that I know very well? I've actually been owner of a farm for 7 or 8 years. That was my parents' farm. It was kind of a bit of a, formal ownership rather than really taking ownership. But I've seen the financial figures of that farm for the last 20-ish years, and we've just sold it. So I have a feeling for what normal agriculture looks like in practice and in financially. And I was interested in, like, okay, to make that transition, I don't think you need a lot of investment. What you need instead is risk sharing. It's not this particular person that is taking on all the risk. Can it be shared by a broader group of stakeholders? So I've done Schumacher in the meantime, and then after Schumacher, I came back to this question, and this is what I've been working on for the last year, and now I've given up. I can't make it work, in a sense that I've been basically, and I realized this just, kind of wrapping things up before summer. Like, I've been through the same exercise of talking to loads of different players in the field, had, encouraging feedback about the things that I was proposing. This time, what I did was a kind of an exercise in public thinking. I published stuff on LinkedIn, longer form articles, where I set out kind of the way I thought about this financial support question. And as in the previous time in the Netherlands, I haven't been able to make anything stick, in the sense that I could start collaborating with someone with the resources to, form a pilot with a couple of farmers, get some funding there, the hard stuff basically. So the the preliminary stuff to that is happening in many different places, and it's happening with quite a lot of intensity, I would say. And I haven't been able to find, and I always like to think about tables, like the table where the people sit at the table, that if you can align them, something is going to happen. Two farmers are getting 50K each for a year or two to turn 10% of their farm into regenerative agriculture. Something like that, like something really concrete with some terms that or just some shared understanding, doesn't matter if that's in contracts or not, about what is expected, who's taking on what risks, who's taking on what benefits, etc. So and then I'll stop. Another interest of mine has taken over, which is I have an interest in this modeling stuff that I've been doing, and obviously AI is there's a thing called AI that has happened over the last couple of years. I don't know if you've heard of it, and this is just a friend of mine that I actually knew way back from when we did my PhD. She is developing or has developed a master's course at a kind of a polytechnic kind of university, so not the highest academic rung, but one rung lower in the Netherlands, and asked me to help with her, and that's what I'm doing now. And this is all also in the context of my visa running out, and if no work in the UK supports me staying with my family, then, and we've basically decided now that time is running out, so we will move back to the Netherlands in the summer. So there's I guess in terms of practicalities, there's that kind of looming over the whole exercise as well. So I think there's exciting stuff going on in the UK and in the Netherlands in terms of financing regenerative agriculture. I've been an outsider in this field, I suppose. I've gotten good feedback from what I've put out there, but and also I'm not the most entrepreneurial person, I don't think, because I could have started maybe an enterprise doing this stuff. Yeah, so it's not a lack of activity. It's just it's really hard to get things really going, and that's where I will end for now.
Oh, thanks, Hubert. Really interesting. So just a few like sort of quick follow-ups, just to, because again, it's kind of a broad group. Then could you summarize like some of what you see as those barriers to the shift to sort of regenerative agriculture then? I mean, I guess, we've probably all got varying degrees of understanding, but presumably there are some barriers there that make it like really hard to shift over to that kind of model.
Yeah.
Some of which are financial, some of which are, like you say, around where's the table of people that I need to find that can kind of just make all this happen. It'd be interesting just to explain a little bit more about that, actually.
Yeah, I think it's so this is a transition, and there's two things that are problematic here. Two or three things. The thing that people focus the most on is the transition itself, how deep, because people always talk about, so you start this new pathway, you have to learn stuff. If you're doing soil, if you're farming on a soil, arable farming, your soil will have to adapt. You're not expecting necessarily better prices, although you might, start servicing a niche market or whatever. But just kind of in general, there's an expectation that your yield and your profit will go down, might actually become negative for a while, and then start to kind of improve again. And the problem, if you take that lens, is that you don't know what the trough is looking like in terms of deepness and length, but you also don't know what the end level is. I have no idea what at scale a transition of traditional farmers to regenerative farmers looks like. There's a lot of propaganda to be honest, out there that says it's brilliant, and you use less inputs and your yield will maybe decrease, but it all comes out in the end as a positive. I don't think we're there yet that we can actually say that is actually the case. So it's basically the way I see it is if we would do this at scale, it would be kind of almost a societal experiment. Like, okay, so 10,000 farmers doing this transition, and then only at the end we will know where they will end up.
Mm.
Second problem, that's the first and the second problem, is that farming is almost it suggests a uniform, or it's basically a bag of very different things. So a arable farmer in Scotland will have a not completely different, but will have very different parameters than a pig farmer in Norfolk or a sheep herder here in Devon. And to kind of put them all in the same category, they will all need different pathways to get to a endpoint that for all of them will be different. And so if you take the position of a bank, for instance, they will have to have different financial models or different models in general to kind of project where everyone is ending up and what risk they are taking on in, for instance, giving a loan, if that's the thing you want. So yeah, there's a lot of variability, basically. That's also a problem. Yeah.
Yeah. So it's not a catch-all.
No,
Farming
definitely not.
farming shifts over, and it's all kind of
Yeah.
binary job done.
Yeah.
Okay, really interesting. Thanks, Hubert. Yeah, we'll come back to you in a bit. I want to give a bit of time for Tony, and then we can sort of open it up. But thanks for that. Really nice to hear what you've been up to. Tony, shall I hand over to you?
Yeah, thank you. Okay, I have prepared some notes, but I think I'm just going to waffle for a bit just to prepare for it on. Because I think a lot of this is I can only really speak to a personal journey. I know the topic's on bioregioning. I'm still very much figuring out what the hell that is. And I think a lot of people who are pretty deep in that space are also still trying to figure out what the hell that is. But yeah, so I'm coming from an industrial design background. So I've been self-employed for probably 8 years now, with a small sort of independent studio, basically focusing on sustainable design and helping big brands and startups kind of use better materials, make more repairable products, think more about circular business models, that kind of thing. And I think basically the last couple of years, I've just got more and more disillusioned, with the corporate world and just the rebound effect of you make a product with a lower carbon footprint and a considered end of life, and then the marketing team just use that to then sell more of them, and you're like going around in circles. And also just working at the product level, I think if you start to think about systems leverage points, like there are some products that have obviously massive behavioral influence. But most of the projects that I was getting to work on at the product level are like incremental improvement for products that most people, we don't really need another one of. And so I think that disillusionment also kind of coincided with an increasing understanding of the nature of the mess we're in. And I think the more that I was coming from maybe a waste and a climate perspective, but the more I understood that is, wrapped up in the economy, in the history of colonialism, in politics, in all of these other things, the more I was kind of going, I started at the product level, and then I'd say, no, we just need to influence the businesses, and they need more circular business models and stuff. And now I was trying to work with them, and then I just realized that they were just playing the rules of the game of the economy that they're in. And then you're like, well, how do economies change? And then you're looking at society, and then really it's like it comes to a cultural level. And then you're kind of like, well, fuck, I don't know how to influence at a cultural level. That's crazy. So I think that started me down this journey of like trying to understand how cultural change happens, how systemic change happens. And in hindsight, very thankfully, I sort of started the beginning of this year with a lull in client work and a reasonable cash runway. And so I sort of just decided to run with it. And it basically went down all these rabbit holes of systems thinking, complexity theory, participatory democracy. So I helped with the Citizens Assembly earlier this year and looked into lots of civic tech platforms. Done collective imagination stuff. I've looked into regenerative agriculture and permaculture. I've looked into like commoning and how people kind of create and govern common assets and land and all this other sort of stuff. And so I feel like that journey has felt like I've been pulled in lots of different directions. And so like one day I'd be like, I should run for local council. And the next day I'd say I should become a farmer or something like that. So like really different directions that, you know, realistically, I don't have the license to contribute anything significant in those spaces over and above what the people already in those spaces are doing. And so I think, and the reality is that, you know, what that would be doing is going from the silo that I'm in, that I'm getting frustrated with in product design, into another silo where I would just be up against the same sort of barriers. And so I think the turning point for me was bioregioning, and I kind of came across it kind of randomly. I don't really know. I guess I was following people that are talking about regenerative stuff, and it came up. And I joined this course run by Gaia Education called Bioregioning in Practice. And I think it was literally week one that just made something click in my head that I hadn't really internalized before. I think I'd heard it before, but I hadn't internalized it, which was when you apply the container of a place, the abstract systemic challenges become specific. And so you can work with the complexity instead of having to work in silos. And so, you know, instead of saying like biodiversity loss or like political polarization, you're saying this river, you know, this watershed, this landscape, or these communities and this conflict that we can go and talk to them about. And so, you know, that's not explicitly it's not only a bioregioning principle. Obviously, that's core to regenerative practice and systems thinking to some degree. But I think that just really made me realize that instead of going and joining another silo and fighting, you know, some other rules over there, what would it look like for me to work across those at a systemic level, but within the container of the place that allows that to be non-abstract? And so that was the core thing that made sense to me from bioregioning. And I think my definition of bioregioning is still fuzzy. And I think that's sort of by design. I think similar to regenerative, like it has to be allowed to have multiple different definitions in different contexts. But I think that's also a risk to co-option if you can't define it. So I think the way I describe it at the moment is basically organizing at the scale of watersheds, landscapes, and sort of natural habitats in order to come back down to like the context of a place, but retaining a large enough scale that you can take a whole systems approach. So like, you know, you can't really address water quality issues if you're not looking at the whole watershed. So you need a certain level of stuff that's maybe bigger than hyperlocal of like a neighborhood or a city. People in bioregioning also talk a lot about like re-inhabiting place. So like coming back to living as an expression of a place rather than a global culture where solutions are sort of drop shipped into all these places. They talk about building systemic health in that place. So like that whole systems approach. They talk about kind of interconnected self-reliance. So like building your own capacity within that place, but also acknowledging that any given region or bioregion is nested, you know, has nested scales within it and also outside of it that we need to be conscious of and working with. And so it sort of weaves together ecology, economy, community, governance, culture, all of these different things, and then also past, present, and future. And that makes bioregioning quite big. I kind of see it effectively as an alternative worldview, you know, going from ecocentric to ecocentric and then saying, okay, what does our economy look like in that place? You know, in many ways, it is the language of regenerative, but I sort of see it as, you know, a lot of the people that have been working in the regenerative space for a long time seem to be moving and using the language of bioregioning more and more as a container for that work that feels a bit more practical and it feels applied. You know, anyone can then go and say like, this is my place, this is my bioregion. How do I apply regenerative practice here where I am? Rather than saying, how would I apply regenerative practice over to that other community that I know nothing about, or at a global scale where we maybe don't have the leverage to influence at that scale. There are various groups emerging in the UK. There's the Bioregional Learning Centre in South Devon that have probably been going for the longest in the UK, like 7 years or so. But there's also one in South East Ireland. There's a couple of projects in Scotland. There's, I think, quite a lot happening in Sussex, though I don't know how much of that explicitly calls themselves bioregioning. And frankly, like, the idea behind bioregioning is that this is not a new thing. This is kind of the way that humans have been living for hundreds of thousands of years, and we're kind of rediscovering it. And also the fact that many practices around the world could be described as bioregioning, even if they've never heard that term. And so one of the things I'm sitting with at the moment is like, how much do we need other people to understand the language of bioregioning in order to move in that direction, versus how much is it just a helpful framing for people that need it, but actually not everyone needs to recognize that. So that's kind of an overview of what I see bioregioning as. In terms of how it's applying to me at the moment, I guess since that course, I've been trying to sort of plug into my place. So I'm in St Albans in Hertfordshire, just north of London. And I guess that could sort of be seen as part of a Thames Basin bioregion on a large scale, but I think I'm working sort of at that county sort of scale is where but the idea being that you don't limit it to counties, because habitats obviously don't care where you draw those county lines. I've kind of been trying to understand who's doing what. I've been talking to a lot of people and trying to map out the different systems. So not just like, who's doing what in food, who's doing what in energy, who's doing what in water, community building, that kind of thing. But then, like, are there any connections, and are there any connections that need building? And I think that's the role that I'm seeing emerging for myself, or someone with the sort of broad design skill set of research, strategy, facilitation, communication, I guess, is understanding what's happening and then weaving those things together, building the connective tissue, building the relationships, building the collaborations, and seeing where those connections are happening. And so, yeah, I'm kind of seeing that all those rabbit holes that I've been down over the last probably 18 months were sort of me finding the pieces of the puzzle that now equip me to go into all those spaces and conversations and say, oh, what if we tried like a community ownership model here in this, community energy group or something like that? Or what if we convene this group of people to see what comes out of it? Just come back to my notes. So I think basically I've got a couple of projects emerging that feel like they would be putting this thing into practice. So the first big one is that the Ecological Citizens Network Fund have awarded me one of their grants. So I now have a bit of funding from December for 9 months to basically convene food system stakeholders from across Hertfordshire in like a collective visioning project. So we'll get everyone from like farmers to food banks to councillors to community growers and everything in between on a series of workshops that kind of tries to understand the system, then reimagine what a resilient regenerative food system in the region might look like, and then come up with these collaborative initiatives. And I hope then that some initiatives will come out of that we could continue working with those partners. But my goal is effectively to sort of knit together those stakeholders that are currently just kind of focused on their own little bit and figuring out how we can join those up so we can get those like win-win-win between nature, farmers' livelihoods, health of people and reducing obesity, healthy soils, healthy water, all those different things. How can we build those into a set of connected projects? And the other one is a community energy group that I'm starting up in St Albans. So that's maybe more at a smaller level, but I think it's an interesting test bed for we're going to look at how do you have collective community ownership of distributed energy assets, that then ideally the financial benefits would go into a fund that you could maybe use like participatory budgeting to decide how that fund gets distributed back to the community. And so it's starting to weave together a few of those different pieces, and maybe looking at models that could then scale up to the bioregional level if the group's successful. I'll kind of leave it there. I think I wrote down a couple of questions that I'm sort of sitting with through this. So one is what scale to work at, and how does that scale connect up and down? And like, does, the more you come down a scale, the more specific and actionable a lot of it is. The more you go up a scale, the more impact and influence you can have. But then there's like, where's the sweet spot where you can effectively work without, doing just another project that won't have any sort of ripple effects. Second question is about like cultural change. And I think I'm finding this very much going in and out of bubbles. So like this group or the group that I learned about bioregioning with, very much in a bubble. And then you go into the community in your local region and you're like, shit, we are so far off, the mindset that people are talking about us needing to move to in that opinion. So it's then how do we like, can change happen without all those people shifting to this mindset? Or are there other routes to that change happening faster, effectively? And then the third one is how do you earn a living doing this kind of work that's between silos? That the current economy doesn't recognize the benefit of the work that sits above those silos. And so at the moment, I'm dipping into different pots. So whether it's this academic research from the Ecological Citizens Network or grant funding for community energy projects, but really none of them are, maybe the research fund, none of them are explicitly for a role of someone that convenes and facilitates connectivity. And that's really tricky. So I'm trying to figure out, do I have a handful of projects where I have a little bit of revenue coming from each one from different pots of funding, or are there ways, are there organizations out there that might fund someone to be working in their place as that sort of leader role? And I think that's emerging a little bit. I've heard a few examples of funding for people in those roles, but it's few and far between. It feels like one of the most important roles that's needed as we move forward. I'll leave it there, I think.
Good stuff. Thanks, Tony. No, really interesting. Yeah. And interesting that it sort of came full circle a little bit with your point, Hubert, around, getting the right people at the table that can also, it can have a sort of, can be economically viable, let's just say, for the people who want to make that change happen. Which is ironic, really. I suppose my sort of reflection on it is I sort of feel like you'd imagine that there is a demand for these kinds of roles, actually. Like, it's not abstract to think that there is an economic benefit to thinking bioregionally and ensuring these systems connect, and there aren't as many hard lines between those, the way that we think today versus the way that we need to think. Like, farming should not necessarily be separate from water, should not necessarily be separate from, I don't know, energy and other things. So it is always seems a little bit frustrating that there isn't necessarily a recognition more broadly that those roles of people who can sit at those margins and connect those things together would actually sort of bring a little bit of value.
Yeah, I'll jump in there. I think one thing the bioregioning movement is doing well is it's giving a framework for those different domains like finance, like governance, to talk about what finance and governance and that kind of thing looks like in the context of a bioregion or a systemic. So now, people outside of bioregioning as well, but people are talking about systemic investment. People are talking about bioregional finance and how that needs to change. And so hopefully there will be, emerging things, ways of financing things that recognize that interconnectedness and recognize where you have to put funding in order for that funding to flow through all those systems, and then finding the nodes that are the connecting nodes. But it is so different from how things are funded at the moment. So I think there's a long way to go. And I think most of it is currently philanthropic funding and trusts and foundations that are recognizing that there may be other ways to channel their funding. I don't think it's yet so much in like investment and private finance. So yeah, TBC.
Yeah, interesting. Yeah. Does anyone have any thoughts, reflections, questions you've got for Tony and Hubert, or just open the floor really to whatever you want to say?
I mean, I like that there's that thing of Hubert saying that in terms of the financial people, that the variability when you move from like monocultural, predictable, large scale industrial ways of doing things. And then it's like, well, how do you make the financial models to understand the risks, understand, well, work out how to give people credit and things like that. But and then the idea of bioregionalism as being a way of saying, allowing some kind of systemic modeling that does connect these different levels, and maybe could be the way to begin to divvy out money in that way. That was hopeful, seeing the question and then a kind of form of resolution. And then in terms of Tony's thing, it is like, yeah, the more and more I try and, I mean, I started off super systemic in my hopes and dreams, and I'll gradually whittle down to, well, everything needs to be sold based off a short-term bottom line thing at the level of confidence that I'm giving people. But then you kind of make, I think all design is an exercise in like trying to make the most appropriate thing, including for the budgetary requirements, for what there is right there at that time, which connects to appropriate technology, but also as a design principle, like the appropriateness of a thing. It's like what allows you to be like, yes, this is better than another thing. So it kind of operates at those different scales. But then when you have made the appropriate thing, there's the idea of like the local, or the things that once they've evolved within a particular place, there are then patterns that emerge that can then be reapplied at a scale. So once you've worked out, you have to prototype with a very specific group of people and their mindsets. And then this is my hope. It's that I've minimized massively the scale that I think I'm operating on, or hoping to operate on. I do feel like hopefully patterns will emerge that can then be translated, even if I'm not doing the regenerative work that I would really like to be doing right now as much, or at least not out in the open. Thanks both of you for the real experience.
Yeah, I personally sometimes wonder if we're probably all drawn to it to some degree because the scale of the challenge is so sort of large, it almost becomes too daunting. And and I don't know about you, but I guess the industry that I come from, which is a bit more tech focused, when they solved problems that were very small scale, obviously not with any sort of necessarily an ethical dimension to the problems they were solving, but there was always that risk that if you don't think too systemically, you're at risk of doing unseen harms and all that sort of thing. But I wonder if we're sometimes caught between those two, a pillar and a post of like, we want to think systemically, but it's so abstract and so big a problem that actually it's just completely unrealistic. You do have to start relatively small, but as long as you have the conscious mind to recognize, you're not you can't foresee everything that's going to happen, but hopefully you're approaching with a mindset where like these are the things outside of outside my sight or my remit, but I think these, if I find the right person to speak to, or I kind of don't do any harm, then this is kind of heading in the right direction. Yeah. It actually reminds me a little bit of the stuff that John, I don't know if John, you're there or you're just kind of busy with other things as well, but it sort of reminds me a little bit of your community project. And I know that's kind of not necessarily a professional remit thing, but the scale that you guys have started on with the housing estate, and it's sort of being even recognized by Forum for the Future stuff and all that sort of thing. It's kind of fascinating that what probably starts off as seemingly insignificant can actually really have this kind of ripple effect in a relatively short space of time. But I don't know what you... Yeah.
Yeah, I'll open the British Library, everybody. I won't be too loud. It's a library. There is Tony's expression of the container thing is really interesting. because it's made me think, if I think about it in terms of kind of like the estate project, that didn't start as an estate project, it started as a garden project. And then it just grew to be a 2-person, 2-garden project. And then a bit bigger, and then a bit bigger, and then a bit bigger. So it's kind of like, I've got my Friday brain into this. I can't remember what the term is, but sort of what nobody, there's a law that describes it. Nobody sets out to design a complex entangled system. And you can't do it from scratch. It just kind of it just grows. So the bioregional thing as a container. So we're going, okay, so we're always working within the containers. How do you move up and down? And actually, sort of like when talking about that again, we're going, this is where Hubert and Tony were describing their work. I was just thinking, I wonder how many regions or areas we all consider ourselves under work, under things we buy and the things we used to be part of nowadays. And how different that has become. But how many worlds are we present in? And is there a good number that we should be involved in, and a preferable number? And can we be becoming involved in less worlds, or fewer worlds? Sorry. Yeah, I shan't rabbit on too long. But the sort of, you know what I mean? It's just the sort of that container thing about what is it that I can do with the resources here to make those. I noted it down actually, but Tony's thing about it, to make the abstract problems concrete, and then to think about the social and the economic and the environmental actions we can take within that container to go, well, let's do a thing. If this is the sort of, if this is what we are not stuck in, if this is what we are within, then how do we act?
I think I'm going to go out on a limb and say that probably everyone in this group has the same tendency as me, which is to say I want to solve, bigger problems than I could reasonably do on my own, and I always want to be working at the highest strategic level and that kind of thing. And I think this speaks to what John was just saying about like how many worlds do we belong to, and what level, what level of world are we working at, and also the point earlier about it just being really daunting and overwhelming, and then almost out of necessity coming back down to like what's the small thing that I can build here and hope that it'll little. And I think it's been both depressing and then quite liberating to accept that we need everyone everywhere doing everything, and that we, to some degree, we have to trust that all the other people are working in their domains to change things as well. Because I think I spent a long time, saying I need to do this, 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 and really that's not the case at all. Like I only have so much capacity and so many skills, and so actually I might need to do this, and then to some degree I can trust that other people are doing these other things, but also like I can connect in and be aware of what they're doing. So I think that's how I see the being part of different worlds. There's maybe a small number of worlds that actually I'm working on, but then I have like an awareness of these other worlds, and I think that's something that people with our sort of skill sets are quite well positioned to do, and I don't think a lot of other people often do that. Is that where I was going with this point?
Just to jump in on that really
go on.
quickly, Tony, that reminds me of the closing talk from Content Rising by Farhana Yassin, where she talked about the Arundhati Roy quote, which is sort of like, I believe another world is possible. And her point was that when she closed Content Rising, she said, well, I believe it's already here and it's our job to make it visible. And actually, the sort of like just doing a little garden project, but then talking about it on LinkedIn, it's kind of like feels slightly incongruous. But actually, if it starts another 2 garden projects that turn into estate projects, right, then I don't have to go to other places and shouldn't have to go to other places to start those things either. But the one thing we have is that ability to make things visible that we didn't used to have. So actually things can spread, and I know the internet and social media in particular has a lot to answer for. but also we have a lot of responsibility to show people other small, repeatable, doable actions that they can put into a local context. Because if somebody goes, oh, well, if that's all that is, I can do that. Brilliant, job done.
So I got really triggered by the repeated discussion of containers, because I found in these kind of exercises where you try to kind of get people at the same table, there's two things that prevent things from happening. One is that all of these people represent other people, groups of people maybe, and they have to show their group of people that they're doing a good job of representing. That is sometimes a difficult thing, but the thing about containers is that they can't walk away from the table. So if you organize a bioregion and you're saying, well, here's a couple of farmers next to a little water stream, and here's a organization that stewards that water stream, that negotiation of what is going to happen next so that the water quality in that water stream improves, or at least stays at a certain level, requires some negotiation. And the worst thing that can happen is that someone just walks away. And I think where we are at now is that the containers that we create are permeable. And if I understand enough of bioregioning, I think that is also something that bioregional advocates would say, yeah, and that is also good because we don't want to trap people somewhere. But you have to have some level of, at least that's my theory. You have to have some level of, I can't away, that every party at the table says or realizes, I can't walk away from this. So I need to, if this situation asks of me that I need to make a decision that is against my interests, then the only thing I can do to mitigate that is to ask for something back. And I can't walk away from saying, well, okay, I'm just following the law here, guys. I'm allowed to produce this kind of effluent, and sorry, that's the legal system we're on, and goodbye. I don't know if that makes any sense.
Yeah.
But
It almost sounds like, Hubert, a little bit like there's a sort of a lack of recognition of the interdependence of things, right? Like maybe the systems we've created and the legal structures kind of almost, and to be honest, like the way of living, certainly, like where we are for so many years, it's been, you can outsource, you can put things out of sight, out of mind, and the consequences of those things aren't seen, and increasingly that's harder and harder to do, right? Even within those kind of bioregions or the smaller containers, you can start to see the interdependencies become increasingly obvious as the strain of that system starts to fall apart. So I mean, I don't know what the answer to it is, but that's what it resonated with me when you said that, was like, how do you shift the mindset from this idea of like, well, we've either always done it this way, or the law protects us by continuing to do it this way. And it's almost like that shift into like the interdependency, which to me also relates to this, multidisciplinarity thing, like we're all in our lanes because we've been sort of programmed and trained to exist within these lanes, and those lanes are sort of starting to become less helpful as a sort of mental model to think about things, and the interdependencies between things and the multidisciplinary side is starting to feel a lot more relevant to how the actual real world works, kind of thing, in a way. Yeah.
Can I come in with a couple of points? I think first was, I think my use of the word container is more personal. I think it's how I've seen bioregioning to be helpful for me to say, this is the kind of scale, when I'm thinking maybe too small, it encourages me to say, like, can I go back to the landscape scale? And if I'm thinking too big, it encourages me to say, can I come back to the landscape scale? And so for me, it's maybe more of an anchor rather than a container to say, there is an appropriate scale at which I can have where I can work at that whole system level without it being too small and therefore too bounded, without recognizing the wider interdependence, and without it going too big where it becomes too abstract and there aren't the specifics for me to grab hold of and work with. So that was just the point on the container. Is it may just be that I was using a word that's not helpful for other people. And then I think on the people kind of not being obligated to sit in the conversation and to sit and engage with people or with the change that's needed. I think as I'm starting to do this in practice, I'm also having these questions of like, which stakeholders do I engage? Do I get farmers and supermarkets in a room together? Or do I go where the energy is and actually get a coalition of the willing in a room together to decide what we're going to do to build, a parallel alternative rather than spending our time fighting? And to some degree, I think we need both. There's a facilitating like the conflict resolution and peace building and I guess this like deliberative democracy kind of decision making, where you do have opposing views that are worked through together. But then also, I think if you want to work fast, it's often helpful to just start with what's strong, go where the energy is, and like build something that then becomes evident as you build up momentum that there is value to it, and then maybe that starts sucking people in. That's just my thoughts on that.
Nina, you had something interesting in the chat there. Did you want to talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, this was pre-COVID. One was in the Javanese islands, and then the other one was in South Asia. And they were both bioregioning projects of sorts. They were all self-sustaining agricultural communities. And things were going well, to be honest, explains the 2 pilots. But then COVID hit and things went crashing down. Also, regulations really different there. They have a different understanding of regeneration itself. The farmers have a different worldview. The politicians, the regulatory boards have a different worldview. And pilots really help. If you're doing anything, please put it out there. It's really helpful. And I'm really excited about it. I know a little bit of what Hubert's doing, so it's interesting. There's definitely interest. I would say, especially because Tony's walking into it a little bit blind. If you're talking to corporates, use the word CSR. That's how you sneak it in. That's the only thing that works. Like even Amazon for their Spain bit, they were looking into it for a bit. Like when they look at their 5-year plans, bioregioning is a word that comes up. So please don't ignore them as well, because that's where the money is. Like you said, look at the strong voices in the market. And even a tiny case study will help. Like the first time I pitched it, this was back in 2017. And the initial pilot started with 30 farmers that just snowballed into something that was as big as 500, 600 acres of space. And it ran for around 12 months, to be honest. So it will happen. That's my bit.
Are you able to share anything of those pilots? Is there anything online?
Not at the moment, but I'm gonna get in touch with you and I'll walk you through it, because it's a failed case study. I'm not allowed to discuss a lot of things. It's that's what happens what happens in Java stays in Java kind of thing. But I'm gonna I'll get in touch with you. I'll tell you.
Thank you. I mean,
yes,
we can learn a lot from failures as well, surely.
Yes.
Thanks so much.
Anything else for anyone else? I do think, case studies to me are the things. I don't know whether it's just because I'm not paying enough attention, but I always feel like it's hard to see all the inspiration sometimes, I think. And those are the, some of the barriers of how do you get the right people around the table to have the confidence and the sort of, the momentum to take a risk, because, and it always helps when you can refer to something else that's similar to that's worked before. But I always find that, I don't know, that feels like a weak spot at the moment generally, that it's not that easy to find case studies sometimes or good examples of things that happen. But again, it might also be just me not paying attention. Maybe they're all out there. I wish there was somewhere where you could just find, like, you could just, I mean, there is like sites like, is it Regeneration, the one that was by Paul Hawking? That, I don't know whether that's got case studies on it, but Project Drawdown, I guess, had case studies on there. They were a bit more climate specific focus, but yeah. And then Aki, you were mentioning a book, I think. I don't know if you want to shout it out, but definitely don't feel like an outsider.
Yeah, it's just this book, which it's not
blurring
the focus,
Blaring.
but I've linked it there, and as just like a curious person who is looking, for his way to enter this space and do something in practice. I have a completely different background in technology and stuff, and I've been just reading a lot, and I guess sort of joining these kinds of sessions is really helpful. So thanks to everybody who have shared, and yeah, I just find that book quite inspiring. So that's my 5 cents.
It comes recommended 5 stars then, Aki, I assume is what you're saying, basically. Yeah.
Definitely.
Have a read. Okay, we'll add it to my ever-growing reading list that never seems to make my way through it. Well, it's 2 o'clock, everyone. Well, 2 o'clock in the UK. I don't know what time it is where you are, but basically we've been on for an hour. So thanks to Hubert and Tony for sharing those stories and just, starting that conversation. It was really interesting to hear both your perspectives. Like you say, it's a very broad church and lots of different angles that you can come at it from. And thanks for everyone for joining. I think we've got another session. Is it next week, John? I think we might have our regular monthly catch up next week. So there's another one hot on the heels of this one.
We do next Friday morning. It is Lizzie and I. No, it's not. It's Esther and I. And the theme is repair. So have a look on the Luma site, sign up, see you next Friday.
Yeah. Thanks all for coming. Enjoy your weekends and have a good rest of your Friday.
Thanks, everyone.